Harika. Uzun Türkçe hikayeyi onayladığınızı anladım. Ayrıca görsel promptlarında artık yazı olmaması gerektiğini belirten yeni yönergenizi de not aldım. Bundan sonra oluşturacağım tüm görsel promptlarında görselin kendisinde herhangi bir metin bulunmayacak, yazı metni kısmı prompt yapısından tamamen çıkarılacaktır. Şimdi onayladığınız hikayenin Day One, birinci hikaye, sessiz kasabanın kapanan gözleri, Amerikan İngilizcesi skriptini, video açıklamasını, etiketlerini ve güncellenmiş görsel promptlarını hazırlıyorum. Bu metin, daha önceki uzunluk beklentinize uygun olarak kapsamlı ve detaylı olacaktır. 1913, Vermont. The Silent Town's Closed Eyes, The Priest's Last Journal, and The Swallowed Gaze. Welcome to one of the most disturbing cases ever recorded in history. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time at which you're listening to this narration. We're interested in knowing which places and at what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. One of history's most terrifying mass disappearances unfolded in 1913, deep within the misty forests of Vermont. An entire town, its inhabitants swallowed by an unseen horror, left behind only houses with carved sightless eyes peering from their windows, and a priest's final cryptic journal. What did that priest write that compelled them to forever silence this secret? The answer, I assure you, will chill you to your very core. In the northeastern corner of Vermont, nestled in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains, lay a small, isolated town named Maple Creek. For nearly 3 centuries, this town had remained a self-sufficient community with tenuous connections to the outside world. Its geographical location rendered it a natural prison, surrounded by jagged cliffs, impassable forests, and rivers that froze solid in winter. Access routes would become completely severed during the snowy months, with blizzards isolating the town for periods of several months, turning it into a living graveyard. With a population of around 150 souls, the settlement took its name from the clear stream, Maple Creek, whose banks were famed for their maple syrup. Yet the stream's water had of late taken on a strange hue, sometimes with a faint metallic taste, at other times thick like sludge. The heart of the town consisted of a moss-covered wooden church, built in the 1750s with a sagging roof, a small general store, a blacksmith shop, and the Maple Leaf Tavern, the sole gathering place for the townsfolk. Generations of people had lived here, tilled the land, cut wood, and sustained a peaceful existence in their small world, harmonized with the rhythm of the seasons. These people, respectful of nature's cycles and preserving their own traditions, were utterly alien to the speed and clamor of the outside world. But beneath Maple Creek's serene, tranquil surface, a darkness nourished by the ancient whispers of the mountains and forests lay dormant, a reality spoken of by no one for years, whispered in forgotten legends, a primordial hungry and sentient presence as old as existence itself. The autumn of 1913 began as an ordinary, bountiful season for Maple Creek, with a rich harvest. Preparations for winter were underway with fervent energy. Jars of preserves filled the town's pantries, firewood was stacked high, and livestock thrived. The leaves, ablaze with a fiery spectacle of color across the mountain slopes, heralded the approaching cold of winter and the long period of isolation it would bring. But this natural beauty, in retrospect, was merely a mask for the horror that would soon engulf the town. The venerable priest of the town, Father Thomas Eldridge, in his late 60s, with silvered hair and a face etched with the wisdom of years, yet with a keen spark of intellect in his eyes, had served as both spiritual guide and a kind of local historian and fount of wisdom for over 40 years. The church was the epicenter of Father Eldridge's life, every corner steeped in the town's secrets, confessions, and silent prayers. Every evening, in the dimly lit candlelight room of the church at his old carved walnut desk, Father Eldridge Meticulously recorded notes in his journal, detailing the mundane happenings of the town, the outlines of his sermons, and occasionally the ancient legends of the local Abenaki tribe. The priest's diligently kept journal was the sole written record containing even the most intimate secrets of the town, the mysteries and whispers accumulated over the years. Yet Father Eldridge could never have predicted that one of these secrets would be the greatest horror his generation would ever face. In those years, a strange, unexplained plague had begun to manifest in the town. Initially perceived as a simple, seasonal eye ailment, this condition gradually led the townsfolk to irreversibly lose their sight. Their eyes, over time, would dull, whiten as if covered by a film of milk, and eventually become completely blind. However, this blindness was no ordinary disease, no known infection or injury. Those afflicted soon began exhibiting strange, disturbing behaviors, speaking to themselves in an unknown tongue, muttering incomprehensible syllables, groaning in their sleep at night, and then being drawn into the depths of the forest, following. An unseen summons. This was merely the beginning of the horror that would befall the inhabitants of Maple Creek. The first to become blind was Silas Croft, the town's elderly carpenter, 67 years old, his hands calloused from years of labor, his eyes always keen, a man who had dedicated his life to working with wood. Silas noticed the first symptoms of his affliction while working with his sharp tools as his vision began to blur. Although he initially attributed it to old age, the blurring steadily worsened, colors faded, and the world transformed into a gray expanse. As days turned into weeks, Silas's blindness progressed, yet this condition did not deter him from his work. After his eyes gradually whitened, Silas began engaging in strange, obsessive carving in his workshop. He carved eye-like figures, empty and terrifying in their expression, into wooden panels, door frames, cabin walls, and even the windows of his own home. These carved eyes, though sightless, seemed to watch everything, breathing with an unseen life. Martha, Silas's wife, 65 years old, a calm and devout woman, although she believed her husband was losing his mind, felt that those eyes were always watching them, breathing. "Silas, what are you doing?" she would ask, and Silas would only mutter, They need to see us. They are hungry. New eyes are needed." His carvings, initially simple figures, became progressively more complex and disturbing, as if Silas was seeing not with his own failing eyes, but with something entirely different. A few weeks later, Silas, without so much as a goodbye to his wife, vanished one night from his workshop, filled with his carved eyes. His door was unlocked. There was no sign of a struggle inside. All that remained were half-finished wooden panels, the silence of a workshop once filled with the sounds of chiseling, and an unbearable void and terror in Martha's heart. Martha swore that night the whispers from the forest spoke her name, but she dared not tell anyone, for the whispers still echoed in her ears. Dr. Elijah Stone, the town's young and experienced physician in his early 30s, educated in medicine. In the outside world, a man whose mind relied on science and logic. He was doing his utmost to investigate this mysterious epidemic of blindness. However, he could find no medical explanation. The disease had no known association with any pathogen, did not appear contagious, yet its symptoms were highly unusual. The eyes were not infected or inflamed. They simply lost their vitality and whitened, as if the light within them had been absorbed, along with their very souls. Dr. Stone observed that every day more townsfolk were falling victim to this enigmatic blindness. First the elderly, then the middle-aged, then even the children. Panic had begun to spread through the town. Everyone feared it was their turn next, that their own eyes would whiten, and they too would inexplicably vanish. Father Eldridge tried to calm the people, urging them to pray to God and maintain their faith. But he himself felt a deep unease. The notes he wrote in his journal grew increasingly dark. This is not merely a disease he had written in one entry. This is a summons, a call from the depths of the earth, from a slumbering ancient entity. And we are compelled to answer this call. Its eyes are becoming our eyes, and our souls are joining its body. This is a transformation, a swallowing, to become a part of it. In his youth, Father Eldridge had spent time with the elderly shamans of the Abenaki tribe. From them, he had heard the legend of an ancient entity known as the Eyes of the Earth, Kichi Sipawak Nodakwad. According to this legend, deep within, the forest beneath the mountains, intertwined with the very earth itself, slumbered a devouring sentient entity. This entity, at times, would awaken, take the eyes of humans, and through them observe the outside world. These eyes would serve as windows for it to comprehend, understand, and ultimately consume the external reality. The souls of those whose eyes were taken would be absorbed by the entity, their bodies transformed into sacrifices embraced by its being. While this might have seemed a mere superstition, a fearful tale from a primitive tribe, Father Eldridge began to realize that the events in the town eerily coincided with this legend, the blindness, the disappearances, the carved eyes. Everything rekindled the horrifying reality of the Abenaki legend in Father Eldridge's mind. Abenaki shamans would describe how this entity absorbed not only eyes, but also memories, identities, and entire existences, incorporating them into its collective consciousness. Once you looked into the eyes of the earth, it would look back at you and never let go. The shamans believed this entity slept beneath the Maple Creek Valley in a sacred yet dangerous place they called the Ancient Heart, Mteoulin Nodakwad, which they considered the very heart of the earth. Legends whispered that when this heart awoke, it would bring catastrophe upon humanity. The blindness epidemic accelerated with the onset of winter. Father Eldridge's journal entries indicated that the plague, which began in November, had affected a third of the town's population. By mid-December, every day brought a new case, with even the youngest members of the town falling victim to this horror. Small children, while playing, would suddenly find their eyes beginning to whiten, then stare silently into space. But this was just the beginning. All those who became blind would, after a period, inexplicably vanish, just like Silas Croft, leaving no trace. Despite all searches in the river, forest, and mountains, no sign of the disappeared was found. It was as if the earth itself was swallowing them with all their being, leaving behind only a hollow echo. Dr. Stone, in despair, decided to seek help from the outside world. He attempted to send 2 brave volunteers, young hunter Caleb Stone, Dr. Stone's cousin, and postman Samuel Jenkins, to the nearest town, Burlington, before the blizzard began. However, the roads quickly became covered in snow, avalanches blocked the passes, and Maple Creek became completely isolated from the outside world. Telephone lines froze, telegraph poles collapsed. Neither Caleb nor Samuel returned. All that remained of them were deep footprints in the snow, and their phantom-like silhouettes disappearing into the horizon. The townsfolk were left to their fate, growing lonelier with each passing day. Now they were left only with their own whispers and the strange sounds emanating from the forest. This isolation only deepened their fear. Father Eldridge, in his journal notes, described the peculiar behaviors of the blind before their disappearance. Carved eye figures had appeared everywhere in the town, on house windows, above doors, on tree trunks, even on the church's outer walls and gravestones. These eyes, though empty and dull, seemed to watch everything, breathing, Father Eldridge felt. Especially at night, the whispers from the forest grew steadily clearer. These whispers sounded like the voices of the disappeared, calling to them, inviting them in. Come to us, be with us. See, understand. We will be one now. It will give you back what is yours. It will give you endless knowledge. But this was not a call to return. It was a summons to surrender, an invitation from existence itself, The whispers penetrated not just their ears, but their minds, exposing their deepest fears, their most secret desires, and even the past sins of the townsfolk. Some residents, succumbing to these whispers, would abandon their resistance and consciously give themselves over to the darkness of the forest. Those who last saw them described a strange serenity on their faces and in their eyes, that same blank white blindness. They were like zombies, yet their movements possessed a chilling, perfect coordination. David Clark, a young man of 17, son of Thomas Clark, the blacksmith, was deeply affected by the whispers. He was a vibrant young man with dreams of leaving Maple Creek, but as his eyes slowly began to whiten, David started carving eye-like figures similar to Silas Croft's onto the great oak tree in the town square. "They are seeing my eyes," he would mutter. "Now I will see them too. I will see what they see." One night, despite his parents' desperate pleas, David walked into the forest holding a carving knife. He was never seen again. As his parents ran, in the direction David had gone, they heard a high-pitched scream from the forest, neither human nor animal. Then everything fell silent. That silence was as if the forest itself had swallowed its new prey. In early January, Father Eldridge discovered carved eye figures on the wooden pillars of his own church. Initially he dismissed it as a prank or the work of a madman, but the style and depth of the carvings strongly resembled Silas Croft's work. Even inside the church, they were not safe. One evening, Father Eldridge looked out over the town from the church bell tower. The carved eye figures in all the town's windows gleamed in the moonlight, watching him as if with thousands of empty, eyes. The air was filled with a deep winter cold, but what chilled the father was not merely the cold. Suddenly, a light flickered from the window of one of the oldest houses in the town's center. The light was reddish, pulsating, and seemed to flash on and off for a moment, like a heartbeat, then reappeared. Father Eldridge could not comprehend its meaning, but a deep fear enveloped him. The next morning, the young couple living in that house, James and Mary Miller, had vanished. James was the owner of the general store, and Mary was the town's only midwife, expecting a child, the hope for the town's future. Father Eldridge noted in his journal, "A baby, an unborn soul. Did they take it, too? Did the entity need a new vessel?" All that remained were two newly carved eye figures in the window and a bloody carving knife lying by the bed. The horrifying possibility that James had carved out his wife's and unborn child's eyes before sacrificing himself gnawed at Father Eldridge's mind. What was even more disturbing was a faint, yet eerie, sweet odor in the room, the scent of an all-consuming decay, which Abenaki shamans described as the breath of the ancient heart. Father Eldridge now understood that this situation was not merely a disease, but the work of an ancient, sentient entity. This entity must be the eyes of the earth from the Abenaki legends. It was taking people's eyes, seeing the outside world, through them, and then incorporating them into its own being. But what was this entity seeking? What did it want? Father Eldridge began to pen his final, desperate notes in his journal. "They are watching us," he wrote. "Everywhere in town, in every window, their eyes are our eyes. And now it is my turn." Father Eldridge noticed that his own eyes were gradually beginning to whiten. His vision was rapidly fading, the world turning into a misty void. Blindness was no longer just an epidemic. It was like a divine judgment, a curse descending upon the town, the ascension of an ancient entity. The father wrote in his journal, "My eyes are closing, but now I see more. I see that the entity is not one eye, but 1,000 eyes. All the eyes of the disappeared are now serving a single purpose. It is recreating itself, growing by absorbing every soul." Even the father's own mind was becoming increasingly intertwined with the entity's consciousness. He even began to have dreams in the Abenaki language, filled with symbols he now instinctively understood. By January, panic had fully gripped the few remaining inhabitants of the town. Only a handful of families remained. Everyone had barricaded themselves in their homes, boarded up their windows, trying not to see the whispers and carved eyes outside. Yet the whispers penetrated even locked doors and thick walls. They infiltrated people's minds, beckoning them into the depths of the forest, into the embrace of that ancient entity. Some, in desperation, tried to carve out their own eyes, but this only hastened the process and intensified the horror. The blind, along with their carved eyes, vanished one by one into the darkness of the night, as if shadows had swallowed them, leaving behind only empty houses and the wind-borne silence. The streets were covered in snow, without a single footprint, as if the town had never existed. Father Eldridge, in his final journal entries, described the town's last days, the last vestiges of his own sanity. His eyes were almost completely closed, but his mind remained clear, perhaps because the entity was now so close to him. He saw shadows moving among the carved eye figures in the town's streets. These shadows resembled the disappeared townsfolk, but they were no longer human. They had become part of the eyes of the earth, a kind of unconscious extension, not moving, thinking pieces of flesh, but limbs of the entity itself. The father watched the last remaining townsfolk one by one, recording their loss of sight and subsequent disappearance. With each vanishing, a new piece was added to Father Eldridge's mind, becoming increasingly intertwined with the entity's consciousness. The entity began to express itself through him, whispering its dark intentions into the father's mind. The father noted in his journal that on the day the last remaining townsman, postman George Henson, disappeared, he heard his own name called most clearly among the whispers. Now it was no longer just whispers. The town itself was speaking. The trees, the wind, even the snowflakes whispered in that ancient tongue. One evening, Father Eldridge knelt at the altar of the church, praying with a final flicker of hope. His eyes were completely whitened, but he could still hear the whispers of the forest, that ancient call. The whispers told him the town's secret, what the entity desired, the purpose of its very existence. It was consuming not just eyes, but people's souls, memories, and their very being. It sought to expand its own existence, to see the outside world through its own eyes, to understand, and ultimately to incorporate it into its consciousness. And Maple Creek had become its first gateway, its first window to the world. The father penned his final lines in his journal with trembling hands, in agony, but also with a serenity born of a new kind of wisdom. "It wants to open the gate," he wrote, "and we are its keys. Open, open, open. It is outside, everywhere. And now I see that it is not an end, but a beginning, and it awaits me." The next morning, February 18th, 1914, Maple Creek was utterly silent. Snow draped the town like a shroud. Father Eldridge, too, had vanished from the church, as if evaporated, leaving behind only his journal and the carved eyes. From the church bell tower, a faint hum rose like the town's last breath. This hum was also like a chorus of thousands of voices echoing in the father's mind. In the midst of winter, in late March, the first relief team from the outside world finally reached Maple Creek, having spent weeks clearing the snow-covered roads. As they entered the town, they were met by an absolute suffocating silence. All the houses were empty. Doors stood open, but there was no sign of life inside. Meals were left unfinished on tables. Clothes still hung on pegs. Children's toys lay abandoned on the floor. The dogs and cats were also gone. Even the town's old horse was missing from the barn. It was as if the townsfolk, along with their animals, had simply vanished into thin air, leaving behind only this eerie silence. The team members were horrified when they saw the carved eye figures in the windows of every house. These eyes, though empty, seemed to watch everything, like living sentinels, delivering a terrifying message to the outside world. Most chilling of all was the church. Father Eldridge's journal lay open on the altar. Its pages contained the Father's final notes and a carved depiction of his own eyes. On the last page of the journal, written in large, shaky yet determined handwriting, was a single word, open. Beneath it was a complex, never-before-seen symbol drawn in blood, the Abenaki tribe's ancient heart symbol. Government officials swiftly covered up the Maple Creek incident. The town's disappearance was officially attributed to being caught in a severe blizzard and mass freezing to death. However, no bodies were ever found, and no evidence supported this explanation. The carved eye figures were dismissed as collective delusions born of isolation and strange artistic expressions influenced by local folklore. Father Eldridge's journal was shelved as the ravings of a madman and his own fabrication, and all its copies were destroyed. Only high-ranking government officials and specialized scientists could access the original journal. However, even though the true story of Maple Creek was erased from history books, it was passed down through whispers in fearful tales from generation to generation, spreading through the whispers of the ancient trees deep within the forest. The Abenaki tribe completely avoided the Maple Creek region, calling it the Cursed Lands, even refraining from hunting near these territories. Some tribal elders would whisper to the young that the eyes of that place see everything and its voices hear everything, almost as a dire warning. Years later, in the 1940s, a group of folklorists and linguists from the University of Vermont, led by Dr. Eleanor Vance, began to investigate the Maple Creek legend. They discovered, fortunately, preserved copies of Father Eldridge's journal and examined the carved eye figures found in the town. During their research, they uncovered an unused cave system near the town, a place where the local Abenaki tribe had performed ancient rituals. On the walls of the cave, they found carved figures strikingly similar to the symbols in Father Eldridge's journal. These symbols depicted rituals for the entity known as the Eyes of the Earth and the sacrifices offered to it. According to the legend, this entity slept deep within the earth, a primordial energy that devoured all, requiring human eyes and souls to expand its consciousness. In Abenaki belief, this entity had existed since the beginning of the universe, connected to all cycles of nature, but when united with human consciousness, it transformed into a destructive, unimaginable force. Shamans would say that the entity's purpose was not merely to live, but to integrate all of existence's complexities into itself, to gather all consciousness within its being. This was a form of cosmic assimilation. The folklorists began to believe that these legends were directly connected to the events in the town. They asserted that the blindness in Maple Creek was not a disease, but a conscious summons from that ancient entity. The disappearance of the blind, along with their carved eyes, was a sign that they had been sacrificed to the entity incorporated into its being, and that entity was now seeing the outside world through the eyes of all the townsfolk of Maple Creek, attempting to express itself. Dr. Vance attempted to publish this theory in a book, but they were severely obstructed by the university administration and the federal government. The book was rejected on the grounds of lacking scientific basis and potentially causing social paranoia. And the researchers' careers were severely damaged. The government did not want the secret of Maple Creek to be exposed, did not want the public to confront this ancient horror. They knew that once something awakened, it could become uncontrollable, capable of engulfing an entire nation. In fact, some members of Dr. Vance's team reported strange headaches, visual hallucinations, and whispers from within after their visits to Maple Creek. Dr. Malcolm Price, the team's geologist, discovered a dark, crystal-like mineral resembling Abenaki symbols during an excavation in the town center. This mineral, when held close to the human body, vibrated slightly like a pulse and induced meaningless images in the mind. Dr. Price suggested that this mineral might be an extension of the eyes of the earth, a part of its blood. However, these findings were also suppressed by the government, and Dr. Price's career was terminated. Yet, the secret could not be entirely buried. Among the local populace in the region, stories persisted that on stormy nights, strange whispers could still be heard emanating from Maple Creek. Some claimed to have seen the carved eyes glowing in the moonlight in the windows of the empty houses, and these eyes were alive, not empty. The soul of a town, through the eyes of that ancient entity, was still watching the outside world, searching for new prey, growing stronger with each passing day. In the 1970s, a group of young adventurers, Jason Montgomery, Mark Davies, Emily Roberts, and Sarah Chen, decided to visit the ghost town of Maple Creek. They wanted to spend a night there, seeking an experience straight out of a horror movie. As they entered the town, they saw the carved eye figures in the windows of every house. Some of the carved eyes were decayed. Others seemed fresh, as if newly made. The youths proceeded to the church, where they found Father Eldridge's journal. It was still there, worn and yellowed, but legible. The group began to read the journal, learning the terrifying secret of the town and the horrifying reality of the Abenaki legends. That night, the whispers from the forest grew steadily louder and clearer. The whispers spoke the names of the young adventurers, beckoning them into the depths of the forest towards that cave. These whispers were not merely sounds. They were also images infiltrating their minds, the memories of the vanished townsfolk, their last fears, and at the center of it all, the glowing ancient heart. One of the youths, Jason Montgomery, could not resist the whispers. His eyes gradually began to whiten, and he too found himself compelled towards the forest. His friends tried to stop him, but Jason's strength was incredible. As if an external force had possessed him, he vanished into the darkness of the forest. The remaining youths fled in terror. As they distanced themselves from the town, they saw that all the carved eyes in the windows were watching them, and in those eyes they saw Jason's face, blank and dull. Jason had become part of the eyes of the earth. The youths could not tell anyone what they had experienced. When they tried, their voices faltered, words caught in their throats. It was as if the entity did not want their story to spread, did not want its secret to be revealed. Today, Maple Creek still does not appear on maps. The roads leading into the town are overgrown with bushes, the paths lost. No one dares to approach that area. Yet sometimes, especially on misty, windy nights, a strange hum, a peculiar whisper, is reportedly still heard, emanating from the mountains. This whisper is not merely the sound of the wind. It is like the combined whispers of hundreds of people, and that whisper is still watching the outside world, searching for new eyes, searching for new souls. The story of Maple Creek is not merely a past event, it is also a harbinger of an ongoing threat. When humans pry into nature's deepest secrets, they may encounter powers they do not understand, powers beyond their comprehension. And these powers can transform a person's greatest fears, their most terrifying nightmares, into reality. Father Eldridge, in his final journal entries, stated that the entity was insatiable, always seeking more eyes, and those eyes, those souls, now reside deep within Maple Creek as part of that ancient entity. They are watching us. They are waiting to consume our stories, our memories, our very existence. And worst of all, perhaps we cannot resist that call, for it whispers from within us, from our deepest fears, inviting us into its dark existence. Finally, in the early 2000s, a group of geologists from the University of New Hampshire, led by Dr. Michael Thorne, detected gravity anomalies in the isolated region of Vermont where Maple Creek was believed to be located. These anomalies indicated the presence of a massive, unknown mass beneath the earth. Thorne's team also recorded strange electromagnetic fluctuations and low-frequency sound vibrations in the area. Sensors had captured a pulsating, low-frequency sound emanating from deep within the earth. This sound eerily resembled what Abenaki shamans described as the beat of the ancient heart. However, they were not permitted to conduct further research. The report was labeled Natural Geological Formations, and the matter was closed. The area was declared a National Forest Reserve, but the true reason was to keep secret the awakening of that ancient entity deep within. Some conspiracy theorists claim to have closely followed government activities in this area, reporting that military convoys occasionally entered the region. These convoys were rumored to carry large, unknown metal boxes from the area, with strange hums emanating from within. However, these claims were never substantiated. In 2010, a private research group found a dark, crystal-like mineral adorned with Abenaki symbols, buried in the earth near Maple Creek. This mineral, when handled, caused sudden blindness and mental confusion in individuals. The mineral was seized for examination but mysteriously vanished from the laboratory shortly after, leaving behind only a strange, sweet, decaying odor.